Hello and welcome everyone to this joint work session between the South Kingstown Town Council and the School Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 9th. The time is 6 p.m. We're getting a nice early start tonight, so hopefully we can get out of here somewhat early. Before we get to that, first order of business is to pledge to the flag. Please rise and join me. Thank you. So I don't know who wants to lead off the discussion tonight. Rob or Marianne?
The Capital Improvement Program here in South Kingstown is a 6-year program. And the idea, as I know you've heard, but I'll recap just for folks in the audience or anyone who might not be familiar with our program, the idea is really to avoid spikes in expenditures. So when you have a building system that fails, you want to have had money put aside so that you're not hitting that expenditure all in one year. When you need a new vehicle, you want to have put money aside so that when that vehicle has to be purchased, you're not spending $60,000, you're putting the last 10 of 6 payments toward that vehicle, and you've smoothed the cost of your capital program over that 6-year period. The Capital Improvement Program on the municipal side is very, very robust. It's been developed over quite some time, decades really, and has worked really very well to ensure that the town isn't borrowing money to buy things because it's hitting those spikes, but rather has got the reserve funds in place to make the purchases necessary. The school Capital Improvement Program has historically been treated as part of the overall municipal program, but it's run somewhat separately. The demands and the stuff that the school department is trying to balance is different than the stuff that the municipal program is trying to balance. But the idea is still the same. The idea is still you want to put that money aside, you want to be able to plan for the big expenditures. This is now part of what the state of Rhode Island is requiring for schools. There's now what is being lovingly referred to as the maintenance of effort mandate, which is over the next, you're going to have to correct me on the dates again. By 2023, the school department, every school department in the state is going to be required to put aside at least 3% of its operating budget, gross operating budget, for maintenance. And that's because the state has recognized that not just here in South Kingstown, but across the state, the demands on the labor side of the education equation have sort of squeezed out the capital side, and the maintenance just hasn't been up to snuff. So, in a way, this is the first year of a much more robust, I hope, capital improvement program for the schools. And I'm gonna turn it now to Marianne Crawford, and you got it.
I forget what's the network? Town Internet. You got to get the network password. Got to get our priority straight. This evening before you was the capital budget, the long-term capital budget for the school department. Just a couple of thoughts. Mr. Zagniewski stole some of my few immediate points that I was hoping to make, but that's okay. That's all right. This budget, as I've said it last night with the school committee, that the capital budget, long-term capital budget, is a living document. And this year in particular, we'll be seeing that because we are in the process of an application process, a stage 1, stage 2 application process For new folks that are here, the Stage 1, Stage 2 application process is what we need to do to get the reimbursement, the housing aid reimbursement, and I'll go through that as we go through this. As we get into the capital budget, the amounts that you're going to see are the Stage 1 numbers that were submitted to RIDE back on September 15th. So if you had seen the town manager's capital improvement budget, you're going to see some very similar numbers, if not exactly all the same. A capital project is a major non-recurring tangible fixed asset with a useful life of at least 5 years and a value in excess of $10,000. The area of focus this evening will be the 6-year capital plan. The school also has what it's called a pay-as-you-go capital plan, which is part of the operating budget, which is over 5 years. That will not be the topic of discussion this evening. That is done with the school committee during our operating budget discussion. Capital improvement plan is typically a 5 to 6 years, which identifies capital needs in a district and provides funding and schedule and timeline for implementation. The capital improvement plan allows for a systematic evaluation of all projects at one time so that this district can anticipate future needs. The capital improvement plan should not include routine maintenance of the districts, but should include required upkeep of the facilities, including but not limited to roof repairs, heating, ventilation systems, or window door replacement or major infrastructure improvements. Housing aid has been around for a number of years. The housing aid, if you look at, is promulgated in Rhode Island General Law 6-7-35 through 6-747. RIDE shall annually award housing aid within the amounts as such time as authorized within the state statutes. Funding shall be awarded after the projects are completed. The state currently does have implemented a pay-as-you-go program, but that's subject to General Assembly approval, and the funding each year is subject to General Assembly approval. Last year, they did approve $5 million with pay-as-you-go. We did apply for that, and we did receive some funding for that, $175,000. Currently, the current reimbursement as of right now is the 35%. I'll get a little bit more into Article 9. That was part of the budget for last fiscal year. That's this current fiscal year. That was adopted by the Governor and the General Assembly. So the Governor and General Assembly recently passed the state budget, which was last June, July timeframe, that includes substantial changes to the oversight, the management, and the funding of the school projects. With the passage of Article 9 from the state budget, the School Building Authority plans to collaborate closely with local education authorities and municipalities to ensure that every school district sees meaningful improvements to the conditions of their public schools over the next 5 years. And Mr. Zielinski alluded to some of the things, such as the maintenance of effort. The change includes an annual maintenance of effort. That starts the current fiscal year we are in. This fiscal year, we have to maintain the school, show that we have a 1% maintenance of efforts on our facilities. What is included in that are the projects we did this summer. We did 2 roofing projects this summer, which comes close to the $600,000. We also can use all our maintenance staff, our 4 maintenance staff, also to help us meet that 1%. It goes up by 0.5% from this fiscal year to 2023, where it maxes out at 3%. There are other means to meet the maintenance of effort. It talks about replacement values of square footage. What the state has done has provided us with detail as to how much the 3 different options will be, and right now the 3% allows us for the minimum. The other ones are up well over $1 million for this current fiscal year. Bond issue was presented to the voters in Rhode Island and approved in November 2018 for $250 million. This will mean that once our application is approved in May of 2019, we will be eligible for incentives. We have been informed by RIDE at a recent meeting of the building committee. We originally thought the incentives could be upwards of 20% more than what we're currently receiving of the 35%. We have since found out it's 50% of what we currently received of the 35%, so the most we can receive with the incentives is 52.5% in housing aid. Under Rhode Island general laws, districts are eligible to receive state aid on capital projects based upon the necessary school construction application process. The necessity of school construction process is basically a multi-stage process. And as we go through the process, there is approvals. There are sometimes questions asked by RIDE, but we work very closely with the delegation from RIDE and the staff there. And we've already started that with recent meetings that we've had with the building committee and yes, also last night with the school committee. First, there's a letter of intent, which we did submit and was approved and authorized us to go on to stage 1. Stage 1, we submit the application on September 15th. And at this particular stage 1 has some beginning information, some demographic information, some construction information and course, but it's not as detailed. Once we get approval of stage 1, we then move on to stage 2. Stage 2 is where we identify the solution of exactly what we will be doing. At that time, LEAs will work with architects and engineers teams to propose solution to identify issues. This process requires the development of schematic design documents that can be used to provide dependable cost estimates. These scope description and company costs are the basis for establishing a budget, project descriptions that will forward to the school Building Authority Board and the Council of Education and Secondary Education. As I just said with the timeline, we did submit we being the district this year, we did submit a letter of intent on December 24th. Stage 1, we submitted the application on September 15th. It was approved on December 12th. The necessity of construction application is at this point scheduled to be submitted on February 15, 2019, with hoping to get council approval from the Council of Education and Secondary Education sometime in May when they meet in May. As I said, this is a multi-phase process. Stage 3 is what we call design review. At that point, the LEAs are required to meet with RIDE, go over their design and bid documents. They provide feedback. We may make some changes. And that all has to be done before we proceed with bidding a project out. Once the project has been bid, construction has been completed. Once a project is what's called substantially completed, that's when we can get the funding. That's when we apply for the funding, the housing aid. Stage 5 is what is called the asset protection. This is the one that they recently changed. Whether they continue calling it the asset protection, I'm not sure. But in other years, we had to submit similar to what was a maintenance of effort, but now under the new regulations and the adoption of Article 9 in the budget, there's definitely benchmarks that must be met. To provide some background of how we arrived at where we are today, 2 years ago, probably this day, we were sitting in the same room and we were presenting the 2018 to 2024 capital budget. During that discussion, it was determined that with the continued decline in enrollment, the district should seek proposal for a professional education and facilities planning firm to provide a comprehensive long-range plan. On April 4th, 2017, after public interviews of 3 vendors, the school committee awarded the contract to RGB. RG commenced work on at that time, and they submitted their report to us in January of 2018. Their final report was submitted in March of 2018, and the district is currently preparing the Stage 1, Stage 2 application. The following long-term projects that I will present to you this evening are based on the Stage 1 application submitted to RIDE and as presented in the town manager's capital plan. As I've stated, this is a living document. Once the district receives the final approval of the application of the necessity of construction, this capital improvement plan most likely will be revisited and may be amended. So now I'll go through the projects. It's broken down by school or building or facilities. Just as a reminder, the highlighted yellow is for the year upcoming, the construction season, which will start July 1. and the remaining years are what we anticipate. There's not much detail in this. It'll just say Stage 1 application because we're still working on vetting out those numbers and getting final numbers. The Hazard School, which is on the campus of the high school, we don't anticipate doing any work there. The administration building is the central office. At this point, we don't anticipate doing any work there. The high school, in 1920, we're exploring doing some boiler chimney repair. And then in the out years, going from 2020 through 2023, we're looking at doing about $12.5 million each year. Curtis Corner Middle School, which is slated to be closed, we're doing some life safety work this current fiscal year, and some minor things in Stage 1. We do have a loading dock that needs to be repaired. It's a pretty significant safety issue. The out years, we are not looking to do any work in that facility. Broad Rock Middle School, we have security improvements. What you'll see throughout this is mainly security improvements in the 1920. And then Broad Rock being our newest school from 2022 to 2024, we're looking at about $5.3 million each year. Matunic Elementary School, again, security of $350,000 for the summer and $5.2 million from 2021 through 2023. Peacedale Elementary School, $350,000 in security improvement and $600,000 for reconstruction of that parking lot. We have had an engineer look at it and has come up with a design for a complete reconstruction of that parking lot. There is a safety issue. We do have a lot of cars there. And currently we have implemented something that has alleviated some of the traffic problem, but with that parking lot needs a major reconstruction. In the out years of Peacedale, we're looking at $3.5 million a year, 2021 through 2023. Wakefield Elementary Schools, we have security improvements. I do anticipate as we wrap up Stage 2 of the application that in the out years of 2021 through 2024, you'll see similar improvements that you are seeing at the other elementary schools. West Kingston, we're looking to replace the HVAC electrical system this current summer. We are working at Matunic School currently and doing that project now at the Matunic School, and security improvements of $350,000. Stage 1 submittal, we're looking at about $5.3 million in the out years. District pavement project, we do have them going out in 2022-23. As we get further into this and complete Stage 2, we may see these also become more of a reconstruction of the parking lots instead of a paving of the parking lots. That may be one of the requirements of RIDE. That's what happened with Petersdale when we did visit with them, that they did ask us to have a traffic study and make it a major reconstruction. And then you have your totals, and that pretty much summarizes the capital improvement for the school department. And as I stated, I do anticipate things changing as we move through the process in the coming months.
Very good, thank you. Just looking at these figures, it's a lot of construction going on in 2021 through 2024. Is there a reason why we're avoiding construction activity in 2024, 25? It just seems like it's putting a very tall order on us to complete all that construction work in that time frame.
It all has to do with issuing bonds. You have to have construction completion within 18 to 24 months after bonds have been issued.
Okay.
I would also,
So our schedule is to issue bonds in July of 2020. So 2 years out is 2022. That's the first phase. The second $38 million is slated for January of 2021, and then 2 years out is 2023.
I'd also caution everyone to remember Marianne's early warning that these are numbers that were based on the Stage 1 application. The project has evolved substantially since we submitted Stage 1. It's a very different project in many ways. So the construction numbers that you're looking at in the manager's proposed CIP and here on these slides really do not reflect the current state of the project.
Also, keep in mind, in the last year, in order to get the reimbursement, the project has to be substantially completed. So that last year will give us some flexibility if for some reason we run into a delay in a project or something like that. So, and we have to somewhat work with the construction season too. So that will give us a little flexibility if for some reason a project takes a little longer.
Right, so specifically, Matutic Elementary School in 21, 22, 23 is slated for $5 million each year, so over $10 million. But we know now with the direction we're going with option A that that's going to be substantially lower. And I'm sure there are a couple of other instances in here.
That's correct. The school building committee got the first look at the cost estimates from RGB yesterday. We've been going through those yesterday and today. We'll meet with RGB again tomorrow to resolve the questions that have come up about those. But yes, the elementary schools are looking at substantially less construction.
And so, where does that leave us on this agenda here? Are we going to talk about the implications of this on the municipal operating budgets?
I'm happy to do that. This is the program as we've got it. We're happy to talk about the gaps that are here. We're happy to talk about how things have changed to the extent that we can. I know folks have got a lot of questions about what the state of the bond project that RGB has been working on. You're going to meet with RGB together tomorrow night, but if you want to sort of use this time to ask questions that we may or may not be able to answer, but certainly if we can, we will. That may be, forearmed is for prepared. I don't know how that works, but it may be an opportunity to sort of get a handle on that before we go into tomorrow night's meeting. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on to the implications. The implications, are easy to summarize. Every dollar you spend on debt service is a dollar you can't spend on direct service. That's the implications. We can talk about that to some greater extent, whatever the will of the body is.
Rob, could you talk about the thing that we discovered yesterday in terms of the differences in terms of the estimates that we received or the similarities?
So if we want to go there, I'm happy to do that. I've got a couple of slides. They're going to be presented in public for the very first time. Are folks willing to hear about work product that is absolutely positively in draft form? We are not, the committee, the school committee has not come to any conclusions, has not made a recommendation. In fact, where I sit right now, I have serious doubts about whether or not the school building committee will be able to make a recommendation by tomorrow. I'm not sure we're going to be able to resolve the questions that we've got sufficiently, but I'm happy to do that if that's, again.
I'd be happy to hear about it.
All right. Here we go. So I guess the first thing to know about where we are with the project. I'm sorry?
Is this somewhere other than up there?
Nope, this is only here. What we have received yesterday, what the school building committee received yesterday, is a project that is $83 million worth of bond-funded activity. The bond-funded activities are those designated on the screen. We've got about $23 million worth of deficiencies that were identified through Jacobs, resolved through the bond. We have $5 million for an Area 1 addition at the high school, $4.3 million for an Area 2 addition to the high school, $5.5 for an Area 3, $7.6 for an Area 4, $15 million for addition work at Broad Rock. And then we have a lot of air conditioning projects, and we've pulled those out because they add substantially to the project. In total, it's hard to get an exact feel for this, and this is one of the questions we'll have for RGB tomorrow. But it looks like about $18 to $22 million worth of air conditioning in the various school buildings of the district. So that's a big question that we have to resolve. And then we have some questions about the security upgrades that have been listed by RGB only because, not because security isn't a good thing, but just because they're always round numbers, and round numbers make me nervous, and we need to dig in a little bit deeper and find out what those are. So it's an $83 million project. It takes care of $23 million worth of the Jacobs deficiencies. When I make that assertion, we have to be a little careful because we're also going to resolve some of the Jacobs deficiencies simply by switching to new space, and this is somewhat fluid. But it clearly does not address all of the deficiencies that have been identified locally. It clearly does not address all of the deficiencies that were identified in Jacobs. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to fashion a recommendation to these two bodies, but we're dealing with a substantial number of deficiencies that won't be addressed if we pursue this strategy, and some big additions. So I don't think that this is going to be something that interferes necessarily with the 15th as our deadline, but there's still some big questions to be resolved. Sure. I think so. Please.
The difficult to justify comments you have underneath the air conditioning for each of the facilities there, who determined that was difficult to justify?
That's my notation. Quite honestly, I have to tell you, there's as far as building maintenance goes, it's a tough one to justify. There may be an educational component that's there. $18 to $20 million worth of air conditioning strikes us as tough. That's a tough nut. Again, we'll talk to RGB tomorrow. We'll get the background on that and get a sense of what was driving that number. Now, to Brian's prompt, one of the things that I'll also note is the notation under the sort of middle row, if you're middle row high school and Broad Rock Addition. I'm sorry, it's actually the deficiency section. The cost estimates that we've got for the boxes in the top two rows are pretty current cost estimates, the cost estimates that RGB's cost estimator went out and got. The cost estimates that we have for the deficiencies component are the 3-year-old Jacobs cost estimates. They were not independently cost estimated. So we're using old data there, and that does, again, give us some pause. We're a little concerned about that.
So I had mentioned at the building committee meeting yesterday for everyone to really be cognizant about the fact that there is, number one, a big difference between what we originally started out looking at, which were the deficiencies on the Jacobs report, making our schools warm, safe, and dry. That's $23 million. We're jumping up to $83 million to fix the rest of our schools, to not just be warm, safe, and dry, but to be a place that our students, our teachers, and our whole community can be proud of. We are in stiff competition right now with districts surrounding us where our students are leaving. We're hemorrhaging money literally to send them there. So it's not just the point of making our schools air conditioned and, extra beautiful with the glass facades for, it's not just a nicety. There is some real financial ties to making sure that our schools are top-notch and that they are extremely presentable. When you have students going to sports events and events at our surrounding schools and they are all brand new and shiny, our students have the ability now to say, I want to go there. And that costs, each time somebody does that, around $18,000. And we're paying this year upwards of $2 million. And this is only the first year that students have been able to go from 8th grade to 9th grade somewhere else. Once that catches on, I could only envision that number growing exponentially if we don't do something to make our schools as the best that they can be. The other thing is I do completely understand that we need to be thoughtful about the number. But if we are asking at this time for the full 83 million and we get the 52.5 reimbursement, it is possible for us to pull back at that point and prioritize what we should and can afford to do as a town. If we don't package that all in at this time, although RIDE has assured us that there's more and more and more money coming, I'm skeptical about that, to say the least. I think we'd be better off to ask for what the full scope of the project and then really prioritize as a town together what we can afford and can't afford to do.
I just want to add one quick thing to that. Well, a couple things. One is that, from my understanding, the bond will be specific to each school. So we have to be a little bit more careful about that idea of being able to use that money elsewhere. The other thing that's really important.
So yeah, you can structure bonds in many different ways. It could be that you structure bonds for specific schools. That's not actually how it's been designed to this point.
You can pretty much write the bond language however you want. If you want to be strict and say, we're going by the stage application for $30 million in the high school, that's it. $10 million on the middle school, that's it. You can write the bond language in such a way so that if a school comes offline at any one time, then you know how much of that bond will never be issued, and then we can move to extinguish it. So you're not letting that liability sit out there on the balance sheet.
But can you move that money elsewhere or no? Or you just
Not if it's specific to a building.
So if anyone would like to know where sort of the HVAC pieces came from, I'm not certain what you meant, what's driving the air conditioning numbers, if it's how RGB was fashioning it, or if, what was the prompt. I would say the prompt was, and I think around the table it was only Kate and I that would have been, I went to all of the all-day meetings this summer with our teachers and Robert Hendricks. I wish I had the information in front of me, but I'm recalling that every table, high school, middle school, and elementary teachers, and Kate's nodding, so I know I'm not losing it, put air quality as the number one piece other than security. And so when we were talking to them, and again, I was at a RIDE hearing on Tuesday, so I don't know what you mean by air conditioning, but in terms of air quality, we have students and faculty on 504 plans throughout the district and have to have their own portable air conditioners in some instances for medical needs, for allergens, and the State of Education address that was done this year with Commissioner Wagner was at Potter Burns Elementary School in Pawtucket that has HVAC. They happen to have air conditioning, but the air conditioning is not the big nugget. It is the scrubbing out of allergens. It's the replacement of oxygen and CO2. And the commissioner spoke about that a little bit. It's like an allergy-free school. And so those are the conversations for health and safety and air quality that I don't want folks to think that the parents and the teachers were just asking to be cooler. It was an entire air quality conversation that happened for 3 days.
That's right. And these numbers here reflect only central cooling. The HVAC built into the projects, in all of the other projects, is outside of these numbers, with the exception of the heating HVAC for the $12 million. The reason that's in there is because we can't tease out what's really allergen and central heating and what's cooling. And the other piece with the high school is it jumps out at the folks from the building trades that when you're doing 4 additions, to have a $12 million HVAC in the old portion of the building while you're also adding 4 new HVAC systems to it seems weird. It's a question. These are not final determinations that that's got to be out. It's just, it's a question for us. But no, the numbers, the 3.4, the 1.8, the 2.5 are central cooling.
I didn't want you to think that RGB sort of just like pulled this rabbit out of their hat. They spent a lot of time with our teachers to come up with those needs.
But I would also note that if we're going to be investing $22 million or so into additions at the high school while we're seeing declining enrollment, we also have to kind of decide maybe we need to scale back on that a little bit to prioritize the HVAC system if that is something that's more important. I think it's not just an either-or thing.
The other thing that the school department administration and RGB have done that's incredibly smart is they've begun to build out a real CIP. And the real CIP is going to take into account the 3% expenditure that's got to be set aside for maintenance and start plugging those projects in. So the concept that RGB presented to the school committee yesterday has a lot of the stuff, and it's worth noting that while Wakefield is in need of repair, none of the repairs in Wakefield were identified as priority one repairs in Jacobs. Jacobs said these are issues that need to be dealt with over time, and RGB's got a schedule for putting the money into the school over time. So most of those projects don't end up being bonded, which saves us money and allows us to put more money into services. So there is some real smart design that's gone into the program. We just have a big number right now, and we have some questions about it still.
I also think it's important to note that RGB yesterday did say you really don't want to tease too much out of their plan because it was planned very intentionally to aim for that 52.5% reimbursement. So I think it's important as we're looking through each different line item in the plan that we don't just kind of arbitrarily pull things out, and the air conditioning just brought that to light for me, literally to light, no pun intended, because light and air quality is one of the one of the categories that qualifies for us for bonus points. So by teasing things out, we could potentially be hindering our ability to get that maximum reimbursement.
That's a great point, and it's really the reason we have to have the conversation with RGB and figure out whether cooling. Jacobs did not identify air cooling as a deficiency. It identified ventilation systems, and the ventilation systems in the RGB proposal as of yesterday are separate from the cooling. So they might be tease-outable. We may be able to pull them out. If, that's the will of the elected bodies. I'm not suggesting. I don't know what the school committee is going to recommend. I'm going to tell you what I think they should recommend. And
Right.
Michelle wanted to speak.
Yep.
So I was just trying to be polite, but maybe I'll just be pushy from now on. A couple of years ago, I went to several presentations at the state level regarding air quality in school, and I wish I had thought that this would come up tonight, and I would have dug out my notes. But they had a map of the state of Rhode Island, and absenteeism of children in schools throughout the state due to asthma and respiratory type diseases. So when I looked at the map, I wasn't surprised to see high concentration, whatever I think they use yellow for the really high concentrations. So I wasn't surprised to see that in the urban areas. What shocked me was all the pockets in this community of noted absenteeism due to respiratory issues. And so I think that, as an educator, having spent significant time of my professional life in buildings with poor air quality, I think this is definitely an issue that we can't, belittle.
Brian, did you?
Emily, to your point, which was a very important point, the fact that this year kids can go from 8th grade to another school district is a huge problem because they don't get to experience SK High School at all and make that determination whether or not they're going to stay in the system. And you're right, we are hemorrhaging money with having to pay, and that number is only going to go higher per pupil. So we need to figure that out as well during this process.
I think we also have to decide if we're investing in programmatic stuff like staff or the facade of a building. You know, it's got to be a balance of what will ultimately attract people.
Which brings me to the next slide, which is just a talking point, but it's...
Rob, I actually had a question on this slide, just for a second. It notes 4 different additions to the high school, is that correct? And those aren't just projects within the building, these are additions of square footage.
That's correct. There are 4 additions, and at this point, the data that we have on all of the additions at Broad Rock and the 4 at the high school are just square footage cost estimates. Right. We don't have materials, we don't have finishes, we don't have information about the specifics.
Are those additions addressing deficiencies identified by the Jacobs report?
So I would say this, they won't have the deficiencies, but they will not address the deficiencies in the core of the building. The Jacobs report identified $89 million worth of deficiencies throughout the entire school inventory. When you back out things that we're never going to repair, like playing fields and tennis courts, and we get down to about $66 million worth of deficiencies in the entire school portfolio. When you take out Curtis Corner because it's no longer going to be utilized, the number starts to be manageable, and the number is about $55 to $60 million worth of deficiencies in the inventory. Prioritized, 1, the most immediate must be addressed, 5, enhancements that can be done over time. All 5 of those categories amount to about $55 million throughout the inventory. We're addressing through this project as designed as of yesterday, we're addressing only 23 of the 55 million. We're then doing additions with the additional money. So the additions won't have the deficiencies. We will not have addressed all of the deficiencies that previous research has suggested we should.
Now, one of the things I saw yesterday in the handout that we got from RGB that was concerning was the $30 million line item for the Priority 1 and Priority 2 deficiencies on the high school. And that's something that we have to dig deeper into because that number is actually higher than what the renovations were, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there's actually a data question about RGB's prioritized list because they use Priority 1 in a way that Jacobs did not. So, for example, on the RGB cost estimation, there are, I think, a dozen Priority 1 items that have to be addressed at Wakefield, but Jacobs had identified 0 Priority 1 issues at Wakefield. So we need to figure out what their data, how those things relate. I just don't know yet.
And also with these addition pieces, they're not just fluffy, right? They're areas that need, they're external, they're parking lot, traffic flow, where the buses, because right now if you've gone near the high school at drop-off time, the parents and the buses are all coming in at the same time, and it's kind of a little crazy. And also the event area with the auditorium, the gymnasium, the locker rooms, things like, so it is including some deficiencies, so it's not just like, oh, let's put on a new addition. It's
right. Yeah, I think the only reason I asked is I think the building, and I don't intend to address this, but I'm sure the school committee and RGB and the building committee will. But I think at maximum enrollment there was about 1,440 students, and I think it's around 950 or 960 now. I mean, it just begs the question, why more space? But again, I don't intend to address it, but.
So, in a 21st century learning environment, we're not teaching kids in rows and columns. Children from K to 12 are working in groups are using flexible seating, have the opportunity for movement. And I mean, I haven't seen a lot of this firsthand, but I have seen youngsters from the high school working on a project as part of their class time. Classes are going on the floor, in the hallway. And I can't give you the numbers tonight, Mr. Veely, but because I don't have them off the top of my head, but I can certainly get them for you, and I'm sure somebody else might have the exact numbers. But the Rhode Island Department of Education standards for square footage per child have increased due to the way educators teach. I teach college. I don't teach in rows and columns. I teach in groups. Even at the college level, my kids are moving all over the room. Think about first graders. They don't sit in a seat anymore. It's just not the way, research shows that's not the way kids learn. It doesn't matter how old you are. And so the larger classroom space is the direction we're going to make our community schools, all of them, absolutely 21st century learning environments with the technology that we're using, with larger spaces, with the ability for teachers to have different stations within a classroom for whatever they're working on. So that has to be taken into consideration also.
I appreciate that. I just will point out that with enrollment drop, we've gained a third. We've gained 35% in space. So
the space isn't in the right place, and that was a valid question that came up that caused the building committee to tour the high school while kids were in session. And it was an aha moment for lots of people, even folks that went to high school there not that long ago. They did see what Michelle is explaining in terms of the very small size of our classrooms. It's not that, so some of these additions are if you think of the first floor where the principal's office is, those classrooms are extraordinarily undersized. Ask any teacher who's got students in teaching in there, the foreign language wing, etc., the CAD group. They're just too small in terms of what the Rhode Island Department of Ed standards are, and that's just one piece. So that would be one addition space, that area. The other piece is our security. So right now we have a campus which is almost impossible to lock down. Students go back and forth to classes at Hazard every day throughout periods in the day, and they're also going out to the wood shop, and that is our legitimate escape route. And so students, you go out to the wood shop and they miss a period or two, and then they come back through the wood shop. We've thought about putting a bridge, putting a gated structure. We have a supervisory teacher assistant there who brings students when they come into the back into the main building. They look at their pass. And so with RGB and the safety security upgrades, one of the pieces is to dismantle the wood shop and then build inside the core traditional building a career and technical center real space. And so that's one of the additions that we don't have right now. And then the third piece is the spine, the general spine of the building, and that's where I think Ms. Collins spoke of like a facade. That's going to be the new front of the building, and so it's really to the guidance suite additions, to the cafeteria additions, to the library, but it's taking the infrastructure and making larger instructional spaces within that infrastructure.
Thank you. So from the square footage aspect of it, obviously the security we need to solve. We're going to solve that whether we put additions on or not. But from the square footage perspective, and I don't pretend to know the answer, but it would seem to me if the classrooms are too small, maybe reconfiguration in the same footprint makes the most sense. And then you don't have the cost of addition. I don't pretend to know it, though.
That is what they're doing. I mean, again, I wasn't there on Tuesday. I was in a legal hearing, but I don't think the outer footprint is changing. Addition gives you the impression, like with the Broad Rock additions, that they're outside of the...
That was my impression.
That's not my sense. My sense is that all of it is transpiring within, and so maybe upgrades to the infrastructure is a better way of phrasing it, unless they showed something very different 2 days ago.
Didn't show anything.
So the physical footprint of the building isn't
Physical
expanding.
footprint is not expanded, from what I know to be true.
So that wasn't my understanding. My understanding was that the facade, because I had asked specifically about why are we putting on a facade?
Oh, the bump out.
To make it
Yes.
look fancy. Instead, I would rather save that money. Number one, if we could save that bottom line, there's our 10 million that we were looking to save, right? So the answer that I received was the facade, the build-out has to happen on the front of the building in order to increase the class sizes. They are going to be moving the walls inside, but it doesn't do it, it's not enough. So the front of the building would have to be built out, whether it was all glass or all marble, whatever it was. There is going to be an expansion on the footprint of the front. So marble would be nice, so we're only asking for glass.
I didn't intend to hijack this, Rob, so if you want to continue with the next slide, it's...
So this slide is a simple slide, and you guys have seen it before, but I think it's an important concept for us to keep in mind. It really is a question of how we're going to use limited resources. And South Kingstown's in a sort of funny place fiscally. We have no debt. I mean, we have the ability to go out and borrow money. We're not going to run into trouble when we start bumping into what Moody's says is a reasonable amount of money to be paying in debt service. The industry standard is you shouldn't be spending more than 10% of your operating budget on debt service. Given the $76 million project that was in the Stage 1 application, we bump up against that for a couple of years. We're up to 9.17, I think was that number. And that number is going to be a little higher if we go with a project that is $83 million. It would put us very close to that 10% warning line. That's where, danger, Will Robinson, Moody starts saying, not so good. But we're not like every other community because we've lived without debt for so long that the money has been used for direct services. Because we weren't paying for debt, we've put it into teachers and we've put it into police officers. We don't have as much flexibility as the debt ceiling, if you will, that everybody else looks at might imply. And if we're going to take on more debt, if we're going to come down here, then we're going to have less educational service, and we're going to have less police service. And if we don't want to be where the yellow dot is, if we don't want to move away from direct services, then we're going to have to move to a new tax line. We're going to have to increase the revenue that comes in. And that the difference between the old tax line and the new tax line that we're contemplating in the CIP that was presented, that $76 million project, gets us from $88 per average household going to debt service right now to $220 per household going each year to pay for debt. That's $220 from every household, average household in the town, that can't be put to direct services. That's why constraining the cost of the project is important. It's not because we don't like, nice things. We love nice things, but we have to choose between nice teachers and nice police officers and nice buildings. We can't do both. Now, that $220 isn't immediate. The way it would be structured, we don't get to that increase for 6 years, Trish. 2025, we'd be building to that over a period of time, but eventually we're there and we're stuck there for quite some time. That's the new plateau. That's why this matters. We have to get the right numbers so that we're not hurting our ability. And remember, you're also being hit at the same time with 3% of your operating budget having to go to maintenance. So we're not just talking about $220 per household to pay for the debt service we're taking on for the building. We're also putting more pressure on the budget because we're putting more of that money into the buildings.
Right. And one quick thing, the average price is $374. To keep in mind that
The CIP predicts a 374, currently it's 554, or 354, I'm sorry. But it will grow. We're going to keep seeing appreciation.
housing prices is what I'm talking about. So. Sorry.
And that 220 number that you just gave has been revised up.
It has, actually.
So I spent the day today going through some financial analysis, and I did update that. I provided a small PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if we're there yet, if you want to discuss that, or just continue.
Oh, I just wanted to.
About the buildings, but we will speak to that, Joe.
I just wanted to illustrate that the number's higher than
And the assumption.
we heard on Tuesday. Yeah.
And the assumption, Brian, on the average homeowner is using an assumption of 1% growth per year.
Correct.
That's how we're going to get to the 374. It may be higher, it may be lower, but those are the assumptions that are built into the budget.
Right, and the other scary thing a little bit is the fact that you have to put away the 3% at a certain point for maintenance on top of their budget.
That will be part of the operating budget,
Right.
yes.
I just have a question, if that's okay. So I know tomorrow we're meeting with RGB, and some of what we're discussing we'll be able to bring to them and ask questions. One of the things that just occurred to me, and if it's an appropriate question, let me know, but it sounds like whether it's 76 million or 83 million that we're looking for in our facilities upgrades, that it gets close to that question of the 10% of total debt. That sounds like a safe zone for debt, according to the research that you've done, your experience. What I'm wondering is, and if this is, what I'm just wondering is, in your fiscal analysis, have you identified what's a more reasonable amount? I'm curious to know that for the building committee and the school committee.
So I'd answer that this way. First, my characterization would not be that the Moody's ceiling is a safe zone. I actually think that because we've structured our purchases heavily toward direct services, it's really not that safe for us. For us, it cuts to the bone, whereas in other communities who've always had debt, replacing debt with debt isn't so painful. We're not replacing debt with debt. We're replacing payments for direct services with debt. That's a very big difference in the way that we're structured. In terms of what, is a more reasonable number, I had a chance to speak to Steve Alfred, the former town manager, and he points out that this is about twice what we've ever carried for debt. A $76 million debt load is about twice what the community has ever carried. Now, does that mean we couldn't do it? Trish has been amazing in putting together a financial plan that makes it possible. Is it wise? That's got to be your call.
So when you're saying the $76 million debt load, are you accounting for all of the debt that the town has, like say the $13 million for the rec center plus the 50% that our town is responsible for? Is that where you're getting that?
Yes, the CIP is a cumulative number loading that $76 million on top of what we currently get.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make it clear for anybody here or listening that when we're talking about 76 million or 83 million, that's the total cost for the project, not what our town is going to be taking on in debt service, assuming that we get that 52.5% reimbursement. We're talking about our town taking on half of that debt. And I'm not saying that I think that's the number we should be aiming for. I just want to make sure that's clear.
So you're right. A couple of things about that, though. One, first, the $88 that we pay currently, it's actually 82 now. You revised that number as well today, I think. I think we're at 82 is what we're currently paying. That's current debt. We pay every household in South Kingstown, the average household anyway, pays $88 toward debt right now. The 220 now revised up is really attributable to the new debt load. It is this project plus a small bond for roads that we would also float at the same time, so $500,000 worth of road project. The school $4 million outstanding bond, which was authorized but has not yet been issued, and this. That's what gets us to 220 plus.
So it's anticipating the 52.5% reimbursement. That
is net of the state contribution. That's what we're paying. That's the increase that we'd incur after the 52% or the 50% from the state.
Any other
Rob, the other night at the work session, I expressed deep concern around the figure of the $76 million. And you had made it clear that you had some confidence that number would really come down, assuming RGB would be able to present more justifiable figures at the school building committee today, which, based on what I'm hearing right now, they weren't able to do that. So which kind of direction are we moving? Do we think that's going to stay at 76? Do we think that's going to increase? Do we think that's going to decrease?
When they presented to the school committee on January 12, 2018, Education Legacy Planning represented that option A would reduce construction costs over option B, because you would not have to do construction at the elementary schools, and because you could downsize the addition at Broad Rock, or the renovations and added space at Broad Rock. The proposal that was presented yesterday did not reduce the size of Broad Rock. In fact, it increased from an $8 million estimate to a $15 million estimate. And the construction at the elementary schools was offset. The reduction in construction, and actually the elimination of construction at the elementary schools, was offset by additional construction at the high school. So what I was expecting, because the representation was made, did not happen.
So, Rob, the other concern is the fact that they were using 2016 numbers for a lot of the Jacob stuff.
All of the deficiencies in that $23 million chunk of work are 2000. As near as I can tell, they are dollar for dollar. I went back and looked at the spreadsheet Jacobs produced in 2016, compared it to the spreadsheet that was presented yesterday, dollar for dollar, identical in that category.
And you would probably have to account for at least 5 or 6% increase over every year, in my opinion.
They've actually built in an escalation factor for the next 2 years for all of their estimates. I don't know. I mean, if Jacob's numbers were good estimates, and they're still relatively good estimates, that escalator may, in fact, take care of it. I just don't know. We have to have that conversation.
So to build off of what Rory was saying, by going from option B to option A, we were taking significant additions to the elementary schools offline, sticking with the same additions at Broad Rock and the high school. But what you're saying is RGB actually came back and kind of with that difference that was created by taking renovations off of the plate at the elementary schools, they added to Broad Rock and the high school?
So I don't want to represent that RGB has added. It's just that the savings that we were hoping to see weren't there, and the increase, there was escalation over on the high school side. I don't know that the scope of work has changed one whit. I don't know that.
Okay.
And Alicia, the other thing that came up in the building committee was the fact that our elementary schools aren't going to have 21st century learning spaces, from my understanding, in that, well, as much as some of the other schools that we're going to spend more money on. The amounts that they were looking at were, I think, only a few $1 million per school.
That wasn't my understanding. My understanding, and what Tracy presented yesterday, is that instead of building 4 new gymnasiums that we would at the elementary schools, that the 4 gymnasiums would stay as they are, and because we would be able to have less students at each of the schools, that they would be able to use the space that we already have in the classrooms and reconfigure the space and have it, there would be multiple spaces for open, flexible seating, 2 per elementary school. Just as Joe was saying, for his example for the high school, why can't you use the footprint you already have and move walls? That's an awful lot less expensive than building out. And so that's exactly what they did in all 4 elementary schools. They used their existing space, the footprint that they have. They're simply moving walls in order to create 2 21st century learning areas in each of the 4 schools without building out in order to use that cost savings. And it appeared to me what they did is because of that cost savings at the 4 elementary schools, they then went over to the high school and said, yeah, let's get that let's put in for the new auditorium, let's put in for the new gymnasium. And so I think that's where some of the extra money went. I think that is money much better spent. Every single one of our students will use that, and it's also, because of the new security, is going to be open for space for our entire town. So you'll have auditorium that the entire town could enjoy. You'll have a gymnasium that the entire town could enjoy. Whether we should or can afford that, that's really a decision that needs to be made. It's not a necessity, but it would be nice to have, and I think it's money much better spent than building out new gymnasiums at the elementary schools. But yes, there definitely are 2 21st century learning areas in each of the 4 elementary schools.
So I would like to follow up on what Mr. Zarnetsky said. I think it's risky to think that Robert Hendricks could have put a price tag on this a year ago. He gave very broad numbers. We knew them to be very broad numbers. And then there were dozens of stakeholder meetings where teachers and parents decided what were important things to put in and what were less important beyond the Jacobs report. And so I fully expected the RGB, who's the architect, who's actually looking at how much this will actually cost, to be different than what Robert came up with. I was hoping it wouldn't be that different, but I thought it would be different. I think most of us did. And I think that they also, meaning RGB, and I haven't verified this with them, but they did have a work session with the school committee on the 20th of December, where my recollection of that work session was saying to them, with the money we have, it would be better spent at the high school, which I think is what Emily said, and that came from the 4 members that were in attendance that evening. So that wasn't a surprise to me either, that they got that direction from the school committee, and they moved what money you have there. I don't know if they moved the facade money, but that was definitely said as well. You know, that instead of making it look as beautiful on the outside as possible, use it internally or cut it and save it for staff, as Emily and Alicia have spoken about. So I'd be eager to hear from them if that adjustment was made, but I knew we couldn't price it off of Robert Hendricks. He's a planner. He's not the architect. He has a broad scope and throws out numbers like it'll cost you X number of $150 million to build a new high school. It's right. It wasn't precise numbers based upon exactly what our community wanted in addition to or in prioritization of Jacobs.
Just very quickly, some things that we can say about the project as it stands as of yesterday. I mean, the things are still evolving. The meeting tomorrow still has the potential to bring some things in that aren't in there. But the bond does not have any gymnasiums for any of the elementary schools. It doesn't have any of the conversions of the, what do you call them, gymaterias, or what are they? Cafetoriums. The cafetoriums are not changed or modified. The big thing that struck me is one of the major recommendations around Jacobs was a lot of technology that's not built into the 23 million. It may be built into the construction, but again, because we're talking square footage estimates in what we've seen, we don't know the technology piece that is built into the new building or the new portions of the buildings. But there's not a lot of tech built into the renovation of the old schools, or old portions of the schools. No major site work other than some paving, some of the construction around.
We were just talking about that because one of the things that the building committee, Joe De Silva of the Rhode Island School Building Authority, said to the building committee last
That
week
shouldn't be there.
was that at Wakefield School, there needed to be a parking lot redesign, and I was just asking Mary Ann if that was included. She said that the engineers are going out tomorrow?
Early next week.
Early next week, so that will be some information, but from all accounts, that seems to be included in that.
Well, isn't now, but will be. Right. It isn't now.
It isn't now?
No, they haven't priced it yet.
Okay.
We haven't seen it yet. We'll see.
Based on the fact, it seems like the cost estimates given by RGB are constantly changing. Do we feel confident in the fact that their presentation tomorrow will be fine-tuned figures for which we can base off?
I don't think that RGB's intention is to come tomorrow to talk about line-by-line numbers. I don't think that's their intention. And I'm not sure that's going to be very productive. The school building committee tomorrow will have that line-by-line conversation with them before they meet with you, with the intention of having enough data so that the school building committee can make a recommendation to these two bodies. I don't think RGB's I've got a couple of thoughts on that. First, I don't know that engaging RGB in that conversation in a public meeting with these two bodies is going to be very productive. I think it's going to be hard to get to real understanding. I think it is sort of roll up your sleeves, just chug through the numbers kind of stuff. I also think that at some point we need a town body to represent whether or not the numbers can be relied on, whether what RGB is presenting is good, solid stuff, or what RGB is representing still needs to be fleshed out. The school building committee has taken on the task of trying to figure out, are these solid enough? Can we trust that these numbers are good? And they've been evaluated by the members of the school building committee. These are hopefully the last sets of big questions that we need to resolve, and I think we're probably close to a recommendation for the town council and for the school committee. The question in my mind right now is whether one 3-hour session with RGB tomorrow is going to do it, or whether we need to have a couple of more meetings before we can say, yeah, I get it. Your data, your priority ones relate to this. We get it. We understand where that number came from. We understand that the justification for that number is X, Y, or Z. We understand that the air conditioning or the cooling system is in there because all of that, once we've got all of those big questions resolved, I think we'll be able to make the representation as a committee to the town council and to the school committee. We've interrogated RGB's numbers. We've torn it apart. We understand it from the bottom up. This is as good as it's going to get to achieve this objective. Now, the set of objectives may end up being multiple recommendations. You can do A or B or C, but I think we're going to be able to get there. Trying to do that in a public meeting in a couple of hours, I'm not sure 3 hours in a closed meeting, and it's not actually a closed meeting, but a couple of hours in a small room with everybody focused on just that, I'm not sure is going to be enough time to do it.
I just want to say, I think your estimate of tomorrow night's meeting is really good, the 2 hours max.
I would find it helpful to hear how we are using the time tomorrow with RGB, and the reason I ask that is it sounds like they're going into the sort of weeds item by item, line by line with the building committee, but that the building committee might not be prepared tomorrow to make a recommendation to us. And so I'm just curious, and maybe this is a question for the chairs, I'm not sure, like what are our boundaries tomorrow? What is our purpose with RGB?
I don't know, that might honestly be something that I need to talk with Bryant about tomorrow after you meet with them.
Actually,
kind of gauge.
Deborah will be running that meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
The concern that we have is that when they brought us the initial numbers, if we can't understand it, then we can't sell it. It's kind of like, believing in what you're selling. And it was a couple pages of numbers, But our concern was we needed more detail. And that's what they're going to bring to the building committee tomorrow, basically adding another column or two to a spreadsheet that they have, because we want to be able to compare some of the Jacobs numbers to their numbers, as an example. The concern that I think the building committee does have is rushing through it. Do you know what I mean? Like rushing through it to have a recommendation. What people need to understand, though, also is that the building committee's job is to take what the school committee wants and try to make that happen. So, but at the same time, we don't want to waste money, and we want to know that those numbers are real, because God forbid that they're low. And one of the biggest concerns we had was the fact that when we picked up on the fact that they were using 2016 numbers, that was quite alarming.
Rob, I guess my question is, frankly, are we rushing this? We had there was a building committee, meeting yesterday, in which we thought today's Wednesday, yesterday, Tuesday, in which we thought RGB would be prepared. We thought the building committee would be ready to make a recommendation. However, that's not the case. Tomorrow there's a scheduled meeting, and we're hoping that a recommendation is ready for a meeting tomorrow night for the school committee and for us. To me, it looks like we're rushing this to an extent, but I want to ask the question to you.
So the agenda that's been posted for the town council will not allow for a vote tomorrow night. So the town council will not be able to vote. It's not been noticed as a vote. So the recommendation to the town council does not need to be tomorrow night. It'll be the same recommendation. So if a recommendation does come out of tomorrow's meeting, it'll be a recommendation to both bodies.
But you need to vote by Monday, right? Because RGB imposed a timeline, I'm forgetting whether it's the 15th or the 18th, in order to change their plans and get them ready to actually send it into RIDE on time.
So that's a variation on Rory's question to some extent, and I would say that my advice to the town council is that the town council not schedule a vote until those numbers have been reviewed and understood and can be represented appropriately. If that is not Monday, then so be it. And RGB is going to have to figure it out. RGB delivered solid numbers, the first set of solid estimates, yesterday. The town is making an $83 million decision, and rushing that is not something that I'm prepared to advise the council to do.
I'm not interested in encouraging you to rush anyone. I'm interested in knowing what the scheduled meetings were. So as I understood it, there was a scheduled meeting in the timeline that was presented publicly that the school committee would vote tomorrow night. And that's sort of the backwards mapping that the building committee and RGB have done, and that the town council would meet Monday. And then we were noticed, and I think it's right that these two bodies get together. I think the more times these two bodies get together, the more opportunity of success we'll have in meeting that deadline. But if you're not meeting on Thursday, my very pragmatic question is are you planning on meeting on Monday? But that might be your regular meeting anyway. Is that it?
It's the regular meeting. The council will be meeting Monday. And
okay.
Again, my hope is that tomorrow this thing goes swimmingly well, that all questions are answered, and that we are able to finalize a recommendation. That's my
hope.
What
would be the plan if your hopes are
dashed,
destroyed? What's the plan?
What I would do at that point is advise the council that we have not yet been able to put together a recommendation, and that we're working on one, and they should delay a vote until we can get them one. That would be my recommendation.
I think theoretically, if we're not ready, then hopefully something can be done quickly to change that. We can schedule a special meeting if need be for a vote on that. And then, if it doesn't work and we can't be prepared by February 15th, it's my understanding now that there's a second deadline in September.
There's a second deadline, and if this has already been addressed to you, please let me know. But the concern is that the safety improvements would either be half of our schools or not any of our schools, and that's what we were struggling with at the second to the last building committee.
Right, and that comes down to reimbursement, right?
And the fact that we've received pay-go money in the amount of $174,999 for work this summer at Matunic, West Kingston, and Curtis Corner for security, and the Peacedale parking lot work could be done this summer, but only if the Rhode Island Department of Education Council on Elementary and Secondary Schools Board approves our application in the A pipeline, not in the B pipeline. In the B pipeline, where we would be getting it in by September, and they would be approving it in November, then what would happen is the school committee would have either a forced choice. They would either have to say, okay, we're going to take this money that has been awarded, or this approval. It's not like we're getting a bucket of money from RIDE. I don't want to create that visual for you. We have approval to move forward on $500,000 worth of security improvements to 3 schools with pay-go money of $174,999 not to be bonded. The other half of our schools will only get those security upgrades and the Peacedale parking lot redesign if the work is done this summer. If not, we're going to get it, but it'll be the following summer for all or half of our schools. And that was a considerable concern of several of our school committee members trying to get that February 15th deadline in place. If that's changed, signal me in some way.
I think that's completely accurate. If we do not have the Stage 2 application into RIDE by February 15th, then security updates will not be able to be made at all of our schools, and instead the school committee will be forced to make a decision about which of our schools are secure. I think that puts us in an extremely precarious and irresponsible position. I think that the fact that, as I started this meeting off with, that if we put in for the project after what can be teased out, should be teased out is tomorrow, that then the application goes in. We can always scale back if it is that's what the recommendation is. We should only embark on a project that our town can afford. So that's, I think most everyone would agree on that, right? So that's something we all agree on. I think something else that we could all agree on is that every single one of our schools should be secure. I don't think that's a position that we want to be put in, to make a decision to make this school secure and that school not secure.
And to make it more complicated, if we don't use the money that's been allocated for Matunic, West Kingston, and Curtis Corner in pay-go by December 31st or December 15th, 2019, then that pay-go money goes away. And so you have to bond in order to get that money.
And I would add to that, the finance department and I am concerned that we should try to get this in as quickly as possible. If we're going to be submitting an application for the 52.5%, then we ought to do it sooner rather than later, because we run the risk of something happening that disrupts the program, that prevents the program from helping us the way we hope it will. September is an appealing sort of period of time, but on the other hand, if the program goes away over the summer because there's been a run on the program in February, that's not good for us. And it's real money. I mean, losing that additional 17.5% state contribution is worth our putting in the effort and trying to get this done. We've been working hard. We're trying to get it done. I'm very hopeful that tomorrow we'll be able to get to a recommendation. If not tomorrow, I think that we will be able to get to a decent recommendation, a solid recommendation to the town council before a vote, whether that is Monday or at a special meeting sometime shortly thereafter. We'll be able to put a recommendation before the town council. Whether we will be able to inform a school committee vote tomorrow night is more difficult to commit to.
So if the school committee votes, so I'm just being practical at this point. If the school committee votes tomorrow night and you're comfortable, right, and you're hearing a dialogue yet not a vote from the town council, and then they meet on Monday or a special meeting next week and change anything, you need to schedule that 48 hours and revote. Just keep that in mind in terms of the planning, the notification for the meeting, making sure you have all members present for a quorum, and the Secretary of State website.
Does the town council meeting on Monday, does the agenda reflect the possibility for a vote? Is the language in there?
We post for that meeting tomorrow. The preliminary notice that went up today does not.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure the public understands the reason for the joint session tomorrow night with RGB is so we all hear the same language. So RGB has been presenting to the building committee, they've been presenting to the school committee. Sometimes you don't hear the same things. So the purpose is for all of us here to hear exactly the same presentation. Once that meeting concludes, the town councilors, Bryant and I, are involved in the building committee, but the other three are not. So they haven't seen the spreadsheet. They haven't seen the numbers. Those numbers aren't final. So the town council needs the opportunity to review and digest those numbers, and we also need the ability to talk about it in a public meeting that needs to be posted amongst ourselves and resolve any questions that might come up. I just want everyone to know we're not trying to stall Monday. I can't imagine we're voting Monday. I would think maybe we're voting 2 weeks from now or in a special meeting. But these folks need time to digest the numbers.
I just want to make sure I'm not suggesting that you don't need time. I'm not suggesting that you don't need time. I just want to keep the timeline of the real timeline in front of all of you, that RGB gave a date of either, I believe it was the 18th of January, but I'd like any human, the 15th is what the building committee visitors and official liaison are saying, in order to then take this, package it, tie it up in a neat little bow, and actually submit it by the RIDE deadline of February 15th. That was very new information for all of us. They shared that for the very first time a week or two ago. We had never heard that before. So we were always operating under the impression that we had till like the 14th at noon. And that came as a surprise to us. But I couldn't agree with you more that this is an important, probably the biggest facilities financial decision that the town has ever made in terms of overall buildings. And so that takes thoughtful, careful deliberation of taxpayer money. I respectfully understand that.
The one thing I would add to that is that the state, the school housing building authority was down a week ago. And I'm less nervous about meeting RGB's tie it up in a bow deadline because the state clearly said, look, we get these packets in all the time, and when we find minor deficiencies, when we find that the bow isn't quite as tight as it should be, we let you know, and we give you a couple of weeks to clean it up. So I don't want to rely on Slack built into a bureaucratic system. I'm a bureaucrat. I rely on Slack built into a bureaucratic system. I think that there is probably some leeway. I'm not suggesting we should use it. I don't think we have cause for being overly alarmed.
I just feel like I'm alone on my own side here. In a minute, I'm going to ping my partner here. So we've dealt with RIDE forever. Right. This is year 32 for me in dealing with RIDE. They're lovely. But I interpreted Joe De Silva's comments very differently because I've submitted things to him and they've been rejected. And so what our fear is that if it's not tied up in the neat little bow, they're going to bump us to the B timeline without your consent. That is a very, very real possibility. And so I just caution that. And then I will stop being the naysayer in the group and just let you imagine wildflowers and happiness.
So I want to address, Kristen, your comments. So I heard RGB say that they were asked, do we have enough time now that we've gone to option A, to get this all done by the 15th? And the answer was yes, we have enough time. However, this and this and this and this has to happen in sequence, and there's no room for much error. And I think that's unreasonable to put against all these elected officials for $80 million. So it is what it is. I'm not expecting, but I wanted to address, you're exactly right, that this whole system has been set up, and it's sort of unfair and unfortunate that that kind of pressure is put on elected officials for such a major expense. So,
Just one more time, for Joe and everybody, it's really like an account, right? Like if you took an equity line out, you don't have to spend it and you don't have to pay on the money you don't spend. So to get the application in, I would say is the important thing. And I think the deliberation should be made before, but I don't think they should end on February 15th either.
I don't dispute that, but I think it's got to go in as right as it can be. And this timeline, this pressure on this timeline is really unfair.
I don't know if there's a way, there's really probably not a way to confirm this, but I mean, last weekend, several of us were at an event for newly elected public officials, and I mean, it was a packed room of school committees comprised of folks that were in this for the first time. So this leads me to believe there are a lot of school committees throughout the state that had a turnover, and which might have resulted in a complete change in direction or even just a slight pivot for what they're doing. So I'm not trying to be overly optimistic here, but I want to be realistic that we're probably not the only community that's in a position where we are making some changes post-November and still trying to hit that deadline. So what are the chances then that RIDE is really going to, I don't want to, again, be too optimistic here. Are they going to shut the door on literally everyone that went through a significant change?
I don't know how many folks are building all over the place, but they're all in different timelines. So some of them have already been approved by RIDE. A lot of the ones that you're hearing about in the newspapers, East Providence, Smithfield, Lincoln, Situate, Newport, I'm trying to think of Westerly, they're already approved by RIDE. And so they're now in stage 3. And so when Joe DeSilva was at the building committee meeting and he's talking about different districts and where they are and the changes that they're making, they're already in stage 3. I don't know how many districts are in our exact space, but you're right. The room, I was there. The room was packed. There were a lot of folks there, and they deal with this all the time. Every community is unique, and every community, is the safety upgrades an issue in Pawtucket? I don't know. Are they doing an entire district? In a lot of the applications they've received, they're high school only. They're 2 elementaries only, 1 middle school, I think, in Barrington. And so we may be one of the only districts that I can think of that are really making improvements to all of our schools. And I know that in and of itself puts a lot of pressure on elected officials. That's not lost on me. But you're right, there were a ton of people there. I was surprised at how many people.
Can I ask a question? Kristen, I don't mean to argue with you, but I was at that same meeting, and my takeaway was completely different on where the stages lie. My takeaway from that was that all of the stage 2s ended up on their desk, and that from that point, they went through each application. That's how he explained that it could be weeks before we hear from them because it's all in where we are in the pile.
You are right. That's what's going to happen. So they all go in for February 15th. And then the first paper that comes in, let's say from Bristol Warren, they go through and they give feedback. And on minor adjustments, they give you time before that May elementary and secondary meeting. So think about the elementary and secondary council like this board, but for the state. And their deadline is a meeting in May where they historically approve or deny these. They're not going to set a district up for denial. So they're only going to put forth a district who's ready and for those approvals. But they're not thinking that going to pipeline B is devastating to us in terms of the security. So they're not going to push you into the May adjustment if your application is not solid, is the point that I'm making.
And I get
They're not just going to deny forever.
Right.
They're going to give you feedback and you go back and fix it. You give you feedback and go back and fix it. That you're absolutely correct on that, Mark.
And I get that part. I guess my question is, are people really at stage 3 already? They are, okay.
For the state.
Okay.
Shovel ready. Yeah, they've bonded,
North Kingston's one.
East Providence is one of them, Smithfield's one of them, most of the ones that I said, and they're shovel ready. And so, and the interesting part about it is East Providence already got the bond approved by the taxpayers, then they hired Robert Hendricks to do the visioning and yeah.
I'm just wondering if it would be most productive at this point, instead of sort of going around, it feels like we're sort of circling around, to wait for the meeting tomorrow with RGB and then meet together and see where we are tomorrow, because the building committee still needs to have the work session with RGB. That's scheduled for, I believe, 2 hours, and then we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. So I think a more productive conversation would be tomorrow.
And I think it's important to build on what Ms. Markey said. What are the expectations for tomorrow? What do you want from RGB to make this decision for at least the school committee, informed and supported by the town council, more effective and efficient use of your time? What do you want them to tell you and be prepared to bring is maybe what they need to hear.
So I'm on the school committee. I'm committed to trying to make the February 15th deadline, because I want the best buildings and learning environments as soon as possible for our kids, right? One thing I'm struck by, and maybe I'm not catching this correctly, but it's unfortunate to me that we might not have a solid recommendation from the building committee tomorrow, because we're waiting on data from RGB, unless I'm misunderstanding it, or updated numbers, and yet we're trying to make a deadline set by RGB.
That's correct. I'd say it's slightly different, though. At this point, I think we have all the data we need from RGB. What we had actually asked them to do for us yesterday, we went ahead and did ourselves. So I think we've got the data. What we now need to do, and the data we were looking for was, how does what you've put together in this proposal relate to the deficiencies identified by Jacobs? We asked them to show us that. We've gone through and done that ourselves. But now we have to have the conversation, because some of their numbers are slightly different. All of their numbers that aren't different are the same, which is peculiar in itself. And some of the things in Jacobs didn't make their list. So we need to go through and say, okay, why are the things that didn't make the list not on the list? Why are the numbers different where they're different? And why are the numbers the same where they're the same? That's the conversation that has to happen tomorrow. So it's not so much a data question as it is a data analysis understanding exercise for us.
I guess, well, for me, what would be helpful tomorrow as a school committee member is to continue on with wherever the building committee leaves in their analysis and their conversations in the morning, so that I can make the most informed decision, because if I understand correctly, we're scheduled to vote on this tomorrow, and to me, the February 15th deadline is important.
That meeting is actually at 3 o'clock, just so you know.
Great.
And that was because of the fact that we need to provide enough notice, and we didn't know that we were going to need that meeting until we met with them that day. I just want to add two things real quick. These are just things to think about. One is operational savings to pay for debt service. That's one concept. And then also, at the end of the day, if this goes to the voters and doesn't get approved, then that's another whole problem. So you have to make sure that we completely understand what we're presenting, and being able to strongly defend and sell to the community that bond.
It's way better than asking for $100 million brand new high school for the money.
But the numbers that I saw yesterday,
That would have been reaching for the stars, right?
Right,
That
but
would have
I've
been
always said
really
we should
great,
have a
but
new
we
high
didn't
school,
ask for that. We were reasonable and said, we'll fix what we had.
right. But the problem I have with the numbers we saw it was yesterday, right? I'm taking Dayquil, so I apologize. That number was 54 million. That was...
Which is half of over 100 million, so we're being very reasonable.
Right, but you're putting 54 million into a 60-year-old building. That was my concern.
Can somebody take her mic, please?
Just turn it off.
So I'm glad we're all going to have a chance to get together again tomorrow night and talk about what the school building committee tells us. Is there anything else that needs to be said at the table? I'd like to open it up to the public for comment.
So what I'd like to do at this point is have Trish go through the long-term debt program as it was built in the CIP, so everyone has at least the debt service component of this in mind as we go into tomorrow night.
I think it's an important aspect to look at how much this is going to cost. I think. But I'm not sure if everybody has this small handout. Okay, so here is where I had explained we revised the numbers a little bit this afternoon. As of 2020, the estimated cost to the average homeowner will be $82. And in year 2025, it's going to grow to $307. So if you look at the next...
I just want to comment, that was the 220 from the original publication.
So if you look at the next page of your presentation, this will show you how it's broken down. So I've broken down each issue and how much each issue will cost per fiscal year. So the $76 million, I think Emily had asked the question whether this includes all the other debt that's associated. Yes, it does. So in year 2021, the $76 million will cost $98. In year, for the $500,000 that we're anticipating on putting a question towards the voters for road bonds, there will be no debt for 2021 because I'll issue that in the following year. So that debt won't hit us until the following year. The $4 million bonds, which is already authorized debt, will be issued in 2021. That debt service won't come on until 2022, and that will cost $28 in 2022. The next slide is our existing debt. So if we were to do nothing, this is where we are throughout the rest of the 6-year plan. And then the next chart is just a cumulative of all of the unissued, the not yet authorized bonds, plus the $4 million that's been authorized, plus our existing debt. So in 2020, there's our $82. 2021, that grows to $181. 2022, so on and so forth. So in the 6th year of the capital plan, cumulatively, the debt service will cost $1,312 on the average homeowner. That's assuming a growth of 1% in values. I'm sorry? Per year is the cumulative. $82 in year 1, $162 in year 2, $230 in... The next slide is just the future debt service, and that just tells you the time frames on when we anticipate issuing the debt, the bonds. That's all based on your assumptions that your high school, and I got this right out of the Stage 1 application, high school renovations will begin July of 2020, will be completed in July of 22. Matunic, West Kingston, Peacedale, Broad Rock, they're all going to begin based on your own timelines, March of 2021 and be completed by December of 2021. This is where I got all the phasing in and where the debt service is going to hit us and deferring the first year of the principal on the first issue out to 2022. And then the next two slides are, these are...
Trish, just On that last slide, on the last line, it says the 55% of new debt, is that?
Yeah, that's what we knew at the time of developing the CIP. Now we know, based on our discussions of last week with RIDE, we will only receive, at max, 52.5%. So these numbers are a little bit lower than what they should be. The next slide is just a snapshot of what we're looking at in the debt service fund. So our existing debt, this is broken out by school debt and town debt. We have school debt on the books currently. If you look in the column that's labeled 2019 to 2020 of $1,036,000. We offset that by other revenues. The other revenues that we take in to offset school debt is the school construction aid, South Road School. So once that bond is completed, that other revenue source will fall off. And then the other revenue that we're taking in is related to the school fair share development fees. That's a total of $576,000. So the net need in property tax dollars associated with school debt is $460,000. The same analysis is done on the town debt. So we have $950,000 of debt expense. Will offset that with $115,000 of recreation fair share fees and $250,000 of real estate conveyance tax fees. So the property tax need to cover the town debt is $584,000 for a total of $1,043,000. So this is the same exercise that's used throughout the debt service. The next line is where we need to be cognizant of. What we're planning on is based on the plan as it exists today, requesting $1.6 million in property taxes. And that number is $560,000 greater than our tax need to plan for when we're bringing on that debt in total. So if you look out in year 2022, that's when we start bringing on the principal payments of the school bonds. So we can't, obviously, with a 4% tax cap, we have to gradually increase our tax need in the debt service fund so that we can cover our debt expense when it comes on full value in 2023.
What that means is this year, we have to start raising taxes just to offset this growth that we see coming down the road. We have to start putting money aside for this now.
So with a 4% tax cap, we can only raise $2.9 million, and we already know by the town's capital work session on Monday of that, $100,000 is already earmarked for property reval. If we're considering the budget that we put forth today, we're looking at an additional $500,000 for debt service obligations, and then that's going to continue to grow. Following year is $300,000. We're looking at $300,000 again, so on and so forth. The next slide is where you're going to see what happens in our debt service fund. So currently, we are in a surplus position in the debt service of $596,000 as of June 30th. In 2019, you can see by the chart before it, our need is $1.2 million. But what we took in, what we requested in tax dollars is only 1.1. So that means we used $107,000 of our surplus in the debt service. That's going to continue throughout the 6-year plan. And so what will happen is you'll notice in year 2024, our debt service fund is in the red. And even though we are taken in additional tax revenues of $500,000 in 2020, but only need $1,043,000 and another $300,000 in 2021, but only need $1.6 million. At the end of the day, at the end of the 5-6 year plan, we're going to continue to need additional tax appropriation to cover our debt service fund over and above what I've already planned here. So I think this last slide that we're looking at is an important slide to consider when you're considering this project.
And this, to school committee member Markey's question, really is what's driving us to try to economize as we look at the project.
And this is at 76 million, correct?
76 million at 55%. So all these extra dollars, we only have so much money that we can raise in property taxes, and 4% is $2.9 million. I'm not sure what the policy is going to be as far as raising taxes here, but we've not gone up to that much, and as far as my mind goes back here in South Kingstown. So the more money that has to be moved to the debt service is less money you're going to have, obviously, in your operating expenses.
All right, thanks, Trish. Any questions on that quick synopsis there?
One quick question, Trish. My concern is leaving room for other things that we might have to bond for in the future.
This is only taken into consideration the school bonds, plus the $4 million that was already authorized unissued,
right,
and plus the $500,000 that we will need in the Public Works Improvement Fund for road construction. This
And that
is
puts
nothing
us
else.
at potentially a high 9.175, is that the number?
Well, if you'll follow this table,
Yeah.
we have no headroom. We have no ceiling room here as far out as when we go out to 2024. And in fact, we're not even on the floor. We've dug ourselves a bit below the floor. There's no room for anything else.
And we have to meet contractual obligations on both sides of the school and the town. This is not taken into consideration any increases in the transfer to the recreation center. This does not take into consideration the transfer into our senior services program.
So I think this gives a really important answer to the question that RGB has been asking at the last couple of building committee meetings, which was how much can the town afford? So now I think that, having this information for tomorrow at the meeting, you have a better place to direct them, and they can say where the cuts should be made in order to still be meeting the criteria to get the maximum reimbursement. So clearly, if this was projected at or made based on the projections of 76 million and at 55%, we can't afford the project. And they asked that, and the answer that was given is we don't know because didn't have this information yet. So that would be a much better place to move forward with them.
I would suggest, though, that part of the answer really is just a policy question. I mean, we can make this work. We can design a program. If you look at our cap on taxes, the state says we can't increase the tax rate more than 4%, or the tax levy more than 4% per year. If we take, as the policy directive, build us the best doggone schools we can, we are going to bump into that, and we're going to have to use all of that leverage that we've got, or all of that headroom on the tax levy. We can raise taxes up to 4%. We can move surplus and we can spend down all of our reserves. We can do these things. The question is a policy question. Are we willing to live with a $45 or $50 million project, or are we willing to live with 4% tax increases for years going out and reserves that are depleted? And knowing that we're also moving into a more constrained operating environment. Again, the challenge for South Kingstown really is you've put money into direct services. You're not replacing debt with debt. You're replacing debt with surplus and direct services. That's the choice is right there. And twice what this community has ever carried as debt is a lot. Half of that is what we've been able to manage in the past and build the strong fiscal environment that we've got.
Very good, thank you, Trish. At this point, then, we'll open it up for public comment, and please try to keep your comments to the discussion that we've had at the table tonight. I will be timing people.
I'll be short. Jim O'Neill, Matunic. I'm just not clear about Broad Rock. I've heard additions, I've heard remodeling, I've heard walls come down, I've heard it was $8 million, now $15 million. What is going to happen with Broad Rock? Do we at least know, are there additions, or are we just redoing internally?
There are additions to Broad Rock.
Pardon?
Additions to Broad Rock.
There are. Okay, and that will be used for kids, for schooling, teaching?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I've spent a few hours lately talking with Revenue Office up at the State House, and they're quite concerned. As you know, in November, their revenue forecast, any number you want to pick, 40 to 50 million. But talking to Marvin Apney, who is the chairman of the House Finance Committee, I don't think I've ever heard him use adjectives and nouns as fearful as he was with how the budget's going to look with the May. Naturally, it's May after we have to make decisions, but with the revenue forecast, and I can only tell you how concerned they were, and that's going to be another issue that we're going to face in front of the voters here. And then my last thoughts are taxpayers are really taking it on the chin here. I certainly understand the need. We've got to improve these schools. But when you tell folks that the education funding formula back in 09-10, and I've given this to you before, we received $10.5 million from the state, our own tax money for our own people. And this year, I think Kristen gave me a number 2 weeks ago, about roughly $5.5 million. $5 million less because we gambled back in 2009 and 2010 not to close Curtis Corner. I've got papers and papers of Bob Hicks when he was here, money we could have saved by closing Curtis Corner, redistributing the kids. $5 million already going out from taxpayers, and now you might want between 0 and 4%. That is absolutely going to be a difficult road to hoe. So I'm just warning you of that, because you're really asking taxpayers to cough up another $6.5 million this year. Thank you.
Gary Chapman, Wakefield. I just have a few questions. Are there any other bonds that have been approved that haven't been issued yet that we have in the system?
There are older bonds. I can get a list. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Yeah. Do we go through them on a yearly basis?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, do we look at the ones that are still open and have a discussion on them?
The audit process. We have, off the top of my head, we have $2.3 million unauthorized, authorized, unissued of open space bonds. So that's one I know we have. We have another.
How old?
Yeah, we have another Guild bond of $1 million, 2006 open space.
Okay.
We have a few. I extinguished a few last year. 4 of them that had been on the book since '98. But we have Municipal Land Bank. Not sure what that is. History's kind of going by. Okay. But I can get you a list of that, Gary.
Okay. Then I guess I'm asking you, and I'm urging everybody involved to take their time and think about this. I've been attending some of the building committee meetings, and I guess when we were at Wakefield School, I asked a question about the security improvements, and if we waited until November to make the Stage 2 submission, that I guess Wakefield and Peacedale would not be able to get security because of the money. But I was also told at that meeting that we do have money available to do those. We just wouldn't get the state reimbursement for that. That's correct, isn't that the way I understood it? It's part of that bond that's available?
The security improvements and also the Peacedale parking lot, other than the $500,000 that we submitted and we received approval for that, are not in any stage, is not in the current application. It's in the application that is in the process of being approved now.
Right.
It's the stage 2. Any cost or any work we do that is not approved in a necessity of construction application, we do not get funding.
Right, but I guess what my question is that we do have money available to do those without state reimbursement. Is that correct?
Yes, unassigned fund balance. The school department is carrying about $2.5 million of unassigned fund balance that can be utilized for security, but then we're not going to be receiving the 35% reimbursement on that.
Right.
And what's more, it's not available for the chart we just saw either. The funds are not available in the future for us, and we're expending those funds now, handicapping ourselves in the future and not getting reimbursement. That's the danger of that strategy.
The only reason why I bring it up is because there is funds available if you wanted to take your time. We'd lose basically $175,000 of state reimbursement to consider $80 million and have time to think about it. I mean, that would be my question. And I guess the other part of the matter is, to me, is that if you go to bond approval in November and don't issue the bond until 2022, you said that we're only going to pay interest, not principal on it for 2 years.
I'm going to issue bonds in 2 phases. The first bond is in July of 2020. We will not pay the first principal, make the first principal payment for 2 years out, and that's the year in which the construction, the project should be completed, and that will offset the, because we'll be getting the housing reimbursement at that time, and that will offset that first year of principal payment coming on the books.
Right,
so the first 2 years we'll be making the interest expense.
And how much is that?
1.266.
Okay, so we wouldn't get any state reimbursement for that either, would we?
No, the project, you get state reimbursement once the project's completed.
Right. So we would be paying money on the bonds with no reimbursement on those first 2 years, which is a lot more significant than the $500,000 that we'd be spending for the security upgrades. So all I'm bringing up is to say that there are some options here that we could consider, and yes, we wouldn't get a portion of state reimbursement, but we still would have the time to let taxpayers know exactly what's going on. Because we're rushing it, I think. So that's all I have to say on that. But I do have a question on the pay-as-you-go section of the capital improvement for the schools. I went through back a few years on the capital improvement, and the HVAC, it seems like, are you doing, West Kingston this year?
We planned, we're bonded and approved for improvements to HVAC at West Kingston and Matunic. But then when this facilities conversation got going a year or two ago, the town council and the manager, it was 2 years ago, I guess, the town council and the manager asked us to hold on all important projects until we knew how many schools would be open for 10 to 20 years. And so the Matunic one was slated to be done over a year ago. And we, after the facilities vote of the school committee, were able to start that process this summer, went out to bid, and the work is ensuing. And then West Kingston will be next year.
Yeah, I noticed West Kingston was in the 2017 CIP for the schools.
Correct. That was the original.
What happened? Did you just take it out? It wasn't approved?
Yes. As I said, everything was moved forward. Everything was put on hold until after the town council could feel confident that they were investing $1 million in HVAC in West Kingston, and that West Kingston would be still open for student 10 to 20 years. I don't know exactly if it was 10 or 20, my recollection.
Okay.
But yes, it was planned quite a while ago and then put off by both bodies, quite frankly.
And then the other question I have is at the high school. I went through past years CIPs, and I don't see anything in the past, anything looking forward for the $750,000 that you have in for this coming year. What is that for?
We did do a roofing project this past summer at the high school. What we did was we scaled it back based on the fact that we were in the process of going through this application process, and one of the areas, particularly in the roof, in the bones of the school, we were looking to do some major construction there, so that part of the roofing project was not completed. So we did do about $600,000 worth of roofing project.
That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about the $750,000 that you have for chimney repair.
That's something this coming summer. That's not in, that's in...
You can pay as you go, $750,000 for boiler
You won't
chimney
put
repair.
$750,000 in and pay as you go. That'd be a bond money.
That's what I would think, too.
One of the things that you or other folks may or may not know, that there was a 10-year moratorium by the Rhode Island Department of Education. We could not plan for any projects unless they were eminent safety. And we did do a project at the high school on the infrastructure. How many years ago? 3 years ago?
3 years ago, yeah.
Okay.
750 is in the 1920, this coming summer, in the bottom of
So this is, the 750 that I'm seeing right here is not pay as you go?
What page are you on, Gary? 4-30?
I'm on.
Yeah, 4-30. That's bond, that's the long-term section. This is the long-term program. That's the chimney repair for 2020.
And the 41 then?
That's for that's for the current year that we're in right now.
And that wasn't bonded, right?
41,000. That's bond.
Everything in there has been bonded?
Long-term is
Okay,
bond.
okay, great. Okay, thank you.
I have a slight cold, so I figured and make sure I didn't spread it. I'm serious, I'm going to do this. This is actually never been used. The end dressing, it was supposed to be on this hand. I had my stuff going on with. Anyway. Hope you haven't started the timer yet, have you?
I did, but I'm not doing very good with my timer today, so don't worry.
You got 30 seconds left. I knew it. That may be after I get over there, that may be the end of our laughing tonight. I apologize to the people at home. Holy cow. It's a thought that counts, right? I'll see this. I've always wondered if this light works. It doesn't work. Is there a light? No. Right.
You'll be the only one touching it, I think.
It's not in the budget.
Oh, no. I'll lick it now. All right. I wanted to start off by saying if there's anybody here from any of the papers this evening, I'm not one of those people that likes to get their name in the paper, so you can just attribute anything I might say that you think you deem worthwhile publishing is, you can just say an anonymous source told me after the meeting. But my name is Doral Beasley. I live in Kingston. I've lived in Kingston. I've lived in South Kingstown since my family moved here in 1955, and I was 8 years old, so I've been here a while. Back in January, I guess some people in here may not know me, so I'm going to go real quick. So back in January, I got involved in this process because I got 2 grandkids that are going through the schools, and I'm retired and I had nothing else to do, so I spent like a couple of thousand hours since then working on this. But seriously, I knew it was getting bad in the summer because when I was mowing my lawn, or in the fall when I was raking my leaves in my yard, all I do when I mow the lawn and rake the leaves, I'm talking to myself about what I'm going to say at the next meeting. I'm driving myself insane. All right. But everything I'm about to tell you is the truth. And if anybody wants any proof of that, I can, any statement I make, I have backup of that, and any data I give you, I show you the numbers. I've been going to the building committee meetings for the last 6 weeks or so with some of the people here. And I'll have to say that there have been times, even a little bit tonight, where I feel like I'm in an alternate universe. I'm a big sci-fi fan, and there was this show on for about 5 years. It's called Fringe, and basically it was, these people live in this one universe, and then they have exactly their kind of same people live in another universe. But I go to the same meetings, I hear the same things, and I've been doing this since last January, and I come away with different perspectives. Now, in my estimation, the facility plan that is written today is a disaster for the current students in our schools and for all the children that are going to follow them. I say that because nothing that's in that plan is going to change our high school to a 21st century building. I'm going to start with the high school. Now, the town manager said that the Jacobs report said there was about $25 million worth of problems in the high school. But when Legacy, Mr. Hendricks, and RGB were making up their plans, the 4 options, over a year ago, they decided on their own, because I've at least 6 different, I've gone through 6 different avenues this past year trying to find where the number 60 million plus the soft cost to 68, now we're up to 83, but where that 60 million, where that number came from. How was it that number was determined to be the number that they were going to spend on our schools? So finally, after a meeting back a few months, I cornered Mr. Hendricks and I said, where did this number come from? He says, well, it's the number we thought maybe that your community could afford. I thought that was kind of pretentious in a way, because when you say that that's all you can afford, maybe not. Maybe it isn't all we can afford. But that plan, as they wrote, the 4 options. Sorry, I've got to eat one of these. You guys did me a favor by not letting me talk last night, because I wouldn't be here probably, which maybe it would have been better for you. All right, so the plans, the 4 options as presented in January at the high school auditorium today are exactly the same. This is 12 months have passed, 12 months. Yeah, we went to the high school, we saw the new facades for the high school, and we were all oohing and ahhing, me included. It's like, wow, that would really be cool looking. Drive by on Columbia Street and see something that looks like it's part of Star Wars. But as on my way home that night, I go, what the heck was I thinking? It's like, why would we even spend a dime on the facade, knowing that behind the facade is a half-baked plan to fix that interior part of the school. Now, in those days, Mr. Hendricks was saying, you might possibly get your auditorium fixed, or maybe we'll have enough money for the HVAC, or the secure entrance for the auditorium and the gym, but you probably won't get a new gym. So it was like this, carrot kind of hung out here, and then you're trying to grab for it, but you can never quite get the thing. So the plan as written today is not going to fix the high school. Now, how do you fix the high school? The plan doesn't fix any of our schools. The survey said, the parents said, we want 21st century schools. And here's another thing that I can't to this day understand. Back in March, I'd been looking online for some new schools, innovative schools, in some, close by. I found one in West Hartford, Connecticut. I sent emails to everybody on the school committee, and the town council, and I asked, anybody wants to go? My wife and I are going to go check it out. My wife taught school for 40 years. She knows what she's talking about. So nobody wanted to go with us. So we went and checked it out. My wife, as we left that building, there were tears in my wife's eyes, and she said to me, if I had been teaching in school, I'd still be working. Now, it just is incredulous to me that in this past year, your consultants never once told you to go visit a new school, go look at a new school, go see what a new school is like. They showed you that virtual reality crud at some of those meetings, right? You don't get the feel for it. I guarantee you, anybody in this room, if you had gone to see a new school, you'd be here today arguing for a new school, not arguing for Band-Aids when you need a transfusion. Now,
Well,
yeah,
if I may, just to try and focus you.
Well, I'm focused.
I know. So you're not pleased with the current facilities plan as it's configured. Do you think we need to devote more resources to it, more money? What is it that you think needs to be?
Right, I got answers for all that. I know it. I know the impetus right now is to sign on the dotted line by February 15th. I'm begging you. I'm begging the school committee, the building committee, the town council to delay to the second chance we have this year, later in the year. And here's why. This plant, you are not ready. You're not ready to make this decision. And I'm going to tell you why in a couple minutes. But I know you want to secure your schools. I got grandkids in the schools. I want them secured too. We've got enough money. You've got enough money already earmarked to secure all but two schools, Peacedale and Wakefield. Now, and I know you really like to fix the traffic flow in front of Peacedale, but what's more important right now? If you want to secure your schools, you take that $600,000 and you secure Peacedale and Wakefield, get it over with, and we can fix the traffic problem down the line. I mean, in April of this year, it's 20 years since Columbine, and if our country after Sandy Hook in 2012, if we didn't, I mean, what are we doing in this country after Sandy Hook? It's been 7 years since that. So we've had time to secure our schools, and I know you really want to secure them, but that's my all I'm going to say on that. All right, so you could build. So I told the building committee the other day, the oldest part of this, in 2022, when rides, why do I keep, I must have the weirdest voice because I keep hearing this hum. In 2022, December 31st, rides offer of the extra percentages for reimbursement are disappear. So that's the biggest thing, that's the biggest fault I had with this plan all year long was why wasn't new part of this plan when RIDE was saying newer and fewer from day one. And I can understand maybe why out of the survey, because at that when the survey was taken, that year the survey was taken, that was the last year we had all nine schools, including South Road, in operation. So people probably said, well, heck, we got 9 schools in operation. Why do we need another new school? But the reason we need new schools is because it's throwing money into schools that are today 56, on the average of 56 years old, and by 2022 are going to average 60 years old, and the high school is going to be, it's to be the 70th anniversary of the construction of the high school. And our 2 best schools, as far as the outside, this is unbelievable. The 2 best schools we have for the outside structure of the buildings are the one that was built in 1904 and the other one was built in 1920. So what you do is this, at the high school, you can leave the the newest part.
Sorry to stop you. So you want a new school, right?
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you how to pay for it now. You ready?
Could you let other people speak first and come back?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I'll go and suck down 6 more lozenges. I'll be back. Part 2. Can I leave this there, though?
Yeah, you can leave that there. And so I know that there's a lot of people in the audience, probably many things to say, and please do stick around for what Doral has to say later, too.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Whaler from West Kingston. I'd like to have a clarification, if I may. You mentioned the tax levy impact being based on $76 million at 55%. And in looking at the capital improvement program portion of it that was presented a little bit earlier, it didn't identify a significant amount of money for Wakefield Elementary. Does that $76 million include substantial millions of dollars that would need to go to Wakefield Elementary?
No.
So, in looking at what the other elementary schools, it seems that if you look at the average or the estimated cost, the cost ranges for each school elementary from $8 million to about $12 million.
Again, the capital improvement plan as published was based on a stage 1 application submitted in, somebody help me out on September. And those numbers have changed substantially because the project that is contemplated now has changed.
Okay.
The project that was contemplated in September would have had additions built to 3 elementary schools. That's no longer the case. And it also would have been a different scope of work at Broad Rock.
Okay. But again, this is the $76 million at 55%. The tax levy impact was only based on 3 elementary schools?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I believe you had mentioned a little bit earlier that there's no room for anything else for 3 elementary schools. So now we're talking about millions of dollars more if we include Wakefield School. Where's that money going to come from? Is it going to come from the operating fund?
So again, we're in the process of working with the consultant to identify the final scope of work. That final scope of work is not going to be what we have right now. Where it's going to come from at first swipe is going to be from the scope of work that's been identified. We're going to have to do some sort of price engineering around this thing. We're going to have to come in with a different project.
Okay. Now, again, based on the tax levy impact, I believe you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, that to retire the bonds based on this chart, it would require a 4% tax levy increase every year through 2025. Is that correct?
If we were doing a $76 million project, again, that's not the project that is currently under consideration. It's the project that we began the analysis on because it was the best numbers we had.
Okay. But right now, as it stands, there's no room for anything else. Is that correct? Anything unforeseen because you're going to be bumping against a 4%?
So right now, as it stands, that may or may not be true. We do not know because we don't have the scope of work. As it stood on September 15th, that was true.
Okay, thank you. And I just have a couple of general comments. As a father of 4 children that have been raised in South Kingstown, I have grandchildren here. Certainly I favor education, but in the best education possible. And my children certainly have benefited from a good education in South Kingstown. But what we need is a balance here. Do we have the ability to afford what's being asked, particularly over the length of time we're going to have to pay for it? We have senior citizens, we have new families moving in, we have businesses. When we increase the tax levy, each one of those groups of people, if not more, will be affected by it. For example, businesses. Their taxes go up, there's going to be a trickle-down effect on the citizens that get those services. So each one of us will be paying more. Senior citizens, I've talked to a lot of people. I ran for office before, so I went door to door talking to a lot of senior citizens. They're very concerned about the tax rates in our town. Some of them are so concerned, they're not sure they can afford to pay for medication or food because of the taxes. So we can't lose sight of that. While we want the best education for our children, the people that have the ability to pay for it, we don't want to drive them out of our town either. Again, the tax rate will affect us for a substantial amount of time. We all have things as homeowners that we have things that are need to have and nice to have. And I would urge the council, when you look at this proposal, that we look at what's really needed and make it reasonable, not just for the schools, but also for our taxpayers as well, so that we can live in this community and still afford to be here in 5 years. Because quite frankly, someone like myself, I'm not sure if I want to be here in 5 years with these type of tax increases. I've talked to a lot of people, they're in the same position. Should they stay? Should they sell? So if we want to make our community the best possible, we have to take all those things into consideration. Not just what's best for our kids, not trying to make the best possible school for our kids. Again, we all want good education, but there has to be a balance between a good education and the ability to pay for that education. Thank you.
Stacy Bozzioni, Wakefield. So I have a question for you, Mr. Zarnetsky. I'm not all that familiar, but are there some exemptions for our senior citizens and other residents who might be at risk if their tax rate increased that would help them out during this time? Because certainly we're not educating their children anymore, so it does seem like...
We do have a means-tested tax abatement for seniors. The number of participants in town, if I'm remembering the number, I can give you a scope. It's under 200 households that qualify for it, and it seems to me that it's under 100 in the last year. So there are some people who qualify and who avail themselves of the program, but it's not
It's not all seniors. Okay.
It's certainly not all seniors. You have to qualify for it, and you have to requalify because it's income. It's an income qualification.
Is it a difficult thing for people to do, or are there hurdles? Is it something that people that don't have means may not also be able to figure out how to do on their own?
You can certainly come down to town hall, and we'll work you through the forms. And if you qualify for it, no, it's a a program everyone who qualifies for is accepted into.
Okay.
There's no extra barriers or anything.
Okay. I'm just sensitive to that. I called Mr. Veely a couple of years ago about our school budget, and you told me that you get a phone call from someone who says if her taxes go up, she won't be able to stay. And I think that these improvements to our schools are very important, but I also don't want to cause irreparable damage to anybody who can't afford it.
Point out, though, that it's a reduction on the taxes. If the rate goes up, their payment goes up as well. It just doesn't go up at the same
as much.
Same rate.
So they're not exempt.
No one is exempt.
Never. Okay. So I have another question. Is it possible for the town council to tell the school committee what an appropriate amount to spend is, what we can afford, to give a budget? I think, Dr. Stringfellow, you mentioned that one other school district did that. They bonded first, and then, which is kind of how we would all do it if we were going to put an addition on our home or build a new home. We would determine what we could afford first. I know we're in a strict timeline, but it looks like we have a lot of work to do to meet that deadline anyway. So maybe that's something, I don't know, maybe that's a silly...
I don't think, Trish, you'll have to help me here, but I don't think you can bond before you get approval from the elementary and secondary education. So what the other districts did is they made an application, they bonded, and then they brought in the planner to talk about, we have this, sort of like, we have this money, this is what our big idea was, and now this is how we're going to spend it.
So I was just thinking more that in the next few weeks as you're making this decision, if the town can say, this is really what we can afford, this is really what we feel our taxpayers can handle, and then the building committee can say, this is what we need to do, just like you would in any other project. And then, I hate to put it to you this way, but some of you probably realize that Scarlett Lewis is in town today. She's speaking tonight. Her son Jesse was killed in the Newtown shootings, and the idea of not making all of our schools secure is very hard for me. And my child would be in a secure school, but I happen to live down the street from a school that would not be. And when my children were in that school shortly after Sandy Hook, we were the cut through for the police and the fire. And every time they went by, I thought, should I head to the school? No parent should feel that ever. And right now we're vulnerable, and I don't think we should leave them vulnerable for 1 minute longer than we absolutely have to. And I know that it's a lot of work that you're going to have to put in to meet this deadline and get it done, but our children need it. They need you to do that work so that we can get it done. Whichever way you need to do. Give a budget or however you need to figure that out. Our children deserve the safety. Thank you.
Tara Apperson. Just a quick question. Can you clarify again, if we were to push to timeline B in September, are we risking reimbursement? Is there a guarantee that that reimbursement will be there, or is it a risk?
So by reimbursement, do you mean the 52.5%?
Yes.
We were told there's not a risk.
There's no risk. Okay.
Although I would
the town manager is not optimistic about that, but we were told by RIDE that there was no risk, and there's enough money in bucket B.
The way the program is has been described to us is this. The state legislature passed authorization for the school building authority to enter into agreements with municipalities to pay their portion of the debt service, their portion of the debt. That authorization to enter into those agreements has no limit. It doesn't say you can do it until X pot of money goes away. It doesn't say you can do it until 2022. It does not have a sunsetting provision, and it is not tied to a particular dollar amount. It is
But will the money be there?
Or will the legislation be there is a question. I mean, to the extent that we're operating in an environment where the rule has been set to address what is perceived of as an urgent need, but an environment that has many urgent needs at the state level, sooner is just better on this stuff. We know the rule is in place today. we don't know that the rule's going to be in place in the future, is my opinion on that.
So I thank you for all of your work tonight and your discussion. I personally feel very much more up to speed on where we are. I am very hopeful that RGB provides you with what you need tomorrow. I know that you're under a lot of pressure. I know this is a lot of money. I also, have watched what our state has promised in the past and, how things work in our state. And I really don't want to risk losing any reimbursement. So, it seems a little muddy. I know you've also done a lot of work on this so far, and so I am hopeful that you'll get information that you need tomorrow, that we will be able to move forward with this. I do think it is incredibly important to invest in our schools. If you've been in our schools lately, which most of you have, you know that we need these upgrades. So hopeful for tomorrow, and thank you for all your work.
All right, Darrell.
So how do we, I actually had something with it. I'm going to pass it out. One copy you can pass around to you guys and then in the back. So here's a bird's eye view of high school. Part, the light color roof, that's the oldest part of the school. Pass around. Talk about here. All right, so if we could only do one thing, right, we have to fix the high school. And by fix it, I mean fix a good portion of it and bring it up to 21st century standards. Not the way the plan is now, which is, if you look at the plan now, the ed spec for the high school, as you walk down a corridor in any level, you pass a room where you pass a new room where they took the wall down between two old rooms and made a bigger room, and now they call it the ideal lab or something. And then you walk down 2/3 of the way down the hall on the other side, and another one. So you'll see these little oases of 21st century learning, but every other space in the building is the same as it is today. If we're going to spend, I don't know what's the number. What's the number we're going to spend for the high school? Total? 54? Okay. Okay, on that schematic I took, that picture I took, if you could knock down the oldest part of the building, so that means the auditorium, the part on Columbia Street, the old shop, the auto place, the gymnasium, everything that's got that light color roof, demo it. That demo at $8 a square foot would cost approximately $1.3 million. Now, in its place, you're going to put up 150,000 square foot brand new building. It'll be 2/3. It'll replace. So you're taking 2/3 of that building away, and you're going to put this building there at $400 a square foot, which they were using $350 for new construction and $250 for renovation. I think the $350 is not enough. For instance, Barrington's new middle school is costing like over $450 a square foot now. So $400 anyway, I think might get the job done. But you could put that building up, and it would cost, including the soft cost. So the building would cost $68 million, and soft cost, you're up to $86 million. Now you go, holy cow, you got to be kidding me, right? but you're going to get 50% back from the state. So you're going to buy an $86 million school, and it's going to cost us $43 million. If we were to do nothing but that, we have to do that. And here's why. We're bleeding students out of this district. They're going to other high schools. They're going to other high schools because they're a new school. They're going to other high schools because they didn't make the sports teams at South Kingstown, and they've been recruited to go somewhere else. For whatever reasons, they're leaving South Kingston High School. 75 this year. I don't know how much that cost us. I know it's over $1 million. Next year, I bet it's higher. And here's the other thing you got to remember. What we're doing here, it's happening all over the state. So all over the state, other towns, cities and towns are upgrading their facilities. If they upgrade facilities and, you know, a family hears about something really good in Coventry or whatever, they'll go, heck, we should go check it out. They go check it out, and they're gone. Now, so we have to produce something. We have to build something here, 21st century, that'll draw students. Every space in there will be 21st century spaces. Your labs, all the technology, all the wiring, everything in there will be good. And you won't have to worry about replacing that facility for at least 4 or 5 decades. The plan was presented by the School Building Authority folks, the last building committee meeting, said that they look at this whole project, you know, they added money from the state. They look at this project as a 50-year project that if all this is done, that not necessarily they're going to last 50 years, but they're hoping that a lot of these schools will last for a long time. If we don't do anything to ours, if we do what we're going to do now to our schools in 2022, when that money goes away, 50 years later they're going to average 110 years old. They won't even be standing. Okay, I'm telling you, you've got to do that now. Here's where I go off the wall. The ed specs for Matunic and West Kingston, they're awful. First of all, in option A, which you've gone back to, as mentioned here, you guys were talking about it, there's going to be nothing done to those schools. Okay, so 4 elementary schools are going to look pretty much as they seem today. They may paint the outside, fix the chip tile, put in a couple new toilets or whatever they need, but that's about it. Now you're going to relegate, by doing nothing in our elementary schools, you're going to relegate all of those children in this district to go to those schools. Why? Back in March, I had a plan that you could build a PK to one school, put it where Wakefield is, about $40 million, and then the other elementary schools would be 2 to 6, and you'd leave Broad Rock at a two-level school. I still think it's a good idea, but nobody jumped on that at all. And I knew I was barking at the wind, because in August I went around door to door in Wakefield to businesses. I handed out flyers. Please come to the next school committee meeting, because I want to talk about the possibility of keeping a school in Wakefield, a new school with 3 times the student body. Not one person showed up. Okay, now, so how do we pay for this? So you could build a brand new 600 student elementary school in both those places for $35 million, plus all that stuff is 44. Okay, you could buy 2 of them. You could buy two $44 million schools, and guess what? RIDE will pay for one. You buy a school, they pay for the other one.
Doral,
Okay, but now I'm going to tell you how to pay for it. Okay, I'm going to. So how do we pay for it? It's a 3-pronged approach. You can do it You can do it like Barrington did. They bonded the entire project, $68.4 million at 3.4%. It raised their for 25 years, bonded for 25 years, not 20. It raised their tax value $1.11. I think that's about 7.5%. Now, South Kingstown's got it all over Barrington. First of all, we have a lot higher, we have a much higher inventory of taxable property. So that's number one. Secondly, Barrington is a built-out community. There's no place to build anything new in Barrington. If you look if you go onto their GIS mapping system like we have here, and bring up, you can have it highlight vacant land. That means for build something on. There's nothing. They're done. So they've got a fixed tax base. In South Kingstown, we don't have that. We have plenty of land where people can still build, but this is for you, town council members. We have to change our zoning laws. We've zoned young people with families out of town. They can't afford the land, and the only type of building, land is so expensive now that's why when you go by and you see all these developments in South Kingstown, they're all giant homes, because the builders and the developers knew that if you're going to have to, you might as well just build a giant home and get a giant payback on it, because there was no money in building a small home. So when we upzoned all our land in the 70s, that was the start of it.
I understand.
Okay, all right. I'm done with that one. All right. So that was one way. So you can
again, I'm going to try and refocus because you've already spoken for 25 minutes tonight. So you're talking about 120 million on 3 new schools.
No.
And I understand that the state will cover 52.5% of it, hopefully. But that other 52.5%, we just don't have the fiscal capacity to do it.
I'm going to tell you how to get the fiscal. I'm going to tell you how to get the capacity.
I just don't believe there's a way.
Here it comes. Here's the way. All right, so I'm the tax assessor. In my off time, when I'm not doing this stuff full time, I'm the tax assessor for the Kingston Fire District. So I'm pretty, knowledgeable what the tax stuff is. But when I was doing this research this year, I kept coming back. I look at these documents that out of RIDE, and it has how much it costs per student to educate a student in Rhode Island. And I kept seeing two school districts in particular, Barrington and Cumberland. They're both those towns, Cumberland's even below Barrington in the cost per student. Both those towns educate a student for $5,000 per student less than South Kingstown. Now, Barrington has 3,400 students in their schools this year, and they have 396 employees of all sorts in their school district. We have 3,000 students, and we have 484 employees. If you were to take, I couldn't believe this until I saw it myself. If you took our 3,000 students and dropped them in Barrington, substituted those two school populations, and if you reduced the number of employees in Barrington by that factor, they would only need in Barrington 352 employees for 3,000 students. So they would need 352 employees, and we have 483. We have 132 extra employees in our school district. Now, so how do you get the money to build new schools? You do it by getting control of your school budget. In South Kingston, we have one employee for every 6.1 students. In Barrington, it's one employee for every 8.44 students. They have, in Barrington this year, hold on a second, they have 282 teachers. And matter of fact, they have a higher percentage of teachers in Barrington, also in Cumberland, than we do. And I factored out, I just want to let you know, I factored out the differential and the transportation cost. Our transportation costs are $4 million this year. Barrington's is 1.2. So that $2.8 million, I took it out when I calculated this up. So the bottom line is this: for every student that we have, it costs South Kingstown this year $4,000 more per student than it does in Barrington. Now, Barrington has the highest RICAS scores in the state, except for Achievement First in Providence, those inner city charter schools. And I looked at the South Kingstown's RICAS scores. They were nothing to write home about. They had 4-star schools. We didn't. I think we had one. I think they had all of theirs, maybe except for one 4-star. So the thing is, we have this choice. We can pay and pay and pay and pay for employees and not get the results and not get new schools, or we can try over the next decade to reduce our payroll and take that money and pay for our new schools. That's a choice where you people have to figure it out now.
So, Mr. Beasley, I understand that we're supposed to pay for this plan by laying off large numbers of students. Or laying off large numbers of people who work in our schools. And
explain to me why we need 132 more employees for a school population.
Well, that's not my responsibility. That is the school committee.
I understand that, but you validate their budget. They're asking for 5 new teachers this year. For what?
I believe they're going to come to us with plans for cutting dozens of teachers. But I think I just want us on the committees, the council, to understand what you're getting at. You're not happy with the plan as it's configured. You want us to build newer schools that provide the 21st education experience that you think our kids all deserve. I think we all agree with that. I just think from what we've heard tonight, we cannot conceivably meet those plans that you have. And I appreciate that you've put in many thousands of hours thinking about it. And I think that energy has to have some positive outlet, and I thank you for bringing it here to us. And I hope that you'll continue to talk to our planning board about long-range plans, because I think the things that you're talking about, to be implemented well in a way that had helped should have been talked about 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, but here we are 20 years later.
Right, but
we have the problem, and what you're saying is, you can't have that attitude anymore. You can't have that attitude. We've had, and this is how it works in Rhode Island. I'm going to tell you how it works, okay? Because I've seen it. This is how it works. School committees, town councils, city councils.
I'm going to end the meeting at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
So you have 5 minutes.
All right. School committees, town councils, city councils in Rhode Island. Because it says right here in NEARI's, on their website, they have what they stand for. Here it is. Support allowing state and municipal employees and their spouses to seek public office and remove all legislative and municipal barriers. Oppose voter initiative. Oppose school choice. Oppose drug testing of employees. In 1976, a gentleman named Albert Shanker, who was at that time the longtime president of the American Federation of Teachers, on an NBC News close-up, said this: "I don't see a voice for students in the bargaining process. I think it's one of the facts of life." Effectively, Shanker believed that the interests of school children are left out of the process, in which union officials act as teachers' monopoly bargaining agents, and that it's pointless to worry about that because it's a fact of life. People who are generally interested in education reform need to be clear-eyed about what he said and the legacy of the monopolistic unionism. The fact is that many teachers' union officials, armed with the monopoly bargaining privileges, often fail to represent the interest of our many talented and hard-working teachers, as well as the interest of our school children. Together with his mentor and teachers' union power builder, Dave Sheldon, Shanker concocted in 1960 a particularly harmful version of the single salary schedule for public educators that now prevails across America. Under this system, the single salary system, as a U.S. Educator Secretary Arne Duncan correctly pointed out a couple of years ago, school systems pay teachers billions of dollars each year for earning credentials that do little to improve the quality of teaching, while at the same time give nothing at all to teachers who go the extra mile to make a difference in students' lives. That was the whole purpose behind the Save Our Schools movement for Wakefield School. It wasn't about saving the school. It was about saving union jobs. Why do you think at the 11th hour, less than 2 weeks before the election, all of a sudden in the papers is an article endorsing 4 members that were going to run for the committee when they hadn't done anything for the last 2 or 3 elections? All of a sudden, boom, here comes the NEARI. So you can poo-poo me, you can say I'm out to lunch, wacko guy, whatever you want, but here's the bottom line. This revolution in Rhode Island has got to start somewhere. The revolution of taking our schools back from the grips of the NEA and get the schools we need, because if we don't, you're going to hemorrhage more students out of the school district beyond and on, and won't have schools for the kids. And if we're going to start the revolution, we might as well start it here in the home of the rebels.
Thank you. All right. With that, I think I'll conclude this meeting. Any other comments from the table up here? All right. See you all tomorrow. Have a good night.
Just as a reminder, it's in the auditorium.
That's fine.